The next closing technique is the sales takeaway. And so the takeaway is basically the opposite of what most salespeople do when they're talking to prospects, which is most of the time when salespeople talk with a prospect, they're trying to get them to move forward, to be interested, and it's always this forward motion. The takeaway is basically the opposite of that. So it's more backward type of motion. Instead of trying to talk the prospect into wanting what you sell, it's almost going backward in terms of expressing doubt in terms of fit or justification, which sounds crazy or like you would never want to do this, but there are strategic times where this can be extremely helpful. And I'll dig into exactly what the sales takeaway looks like, when you should do it, why you should do it, and why it's powerful. And so one of the reasons why it's extremely powerful is that the takeaway is the opposite of what most salespeople do. Either most salespeople never do a takeaway, or especially product selling salespeople, they will always be pushing the product, trying to get the prospect to move forward until they reach a point where the prospect is basically disqualified and the conversation is ending. Let me give you some examples of what a takeaway can look like. So I mentioned it's basically expressing doubt. And so when you start to sense that things aren't really clearly moving forward, you can start to doubt whether or not things should move forward. So there's a saying here, when in doubt, call it out. And basically the takeaway is kind of calling out your doubt as to whether or not it makes sense to move forward. So there's some different scenarios when this might make sense. I'll just give you a few scenarios so that you can help to have clarity around what the takeaway is and what it looks like. And of course, there are many different situations when you would do this, but let me give you some examples and then you can digest those and keep those in mind with basically convert those to your situation. If you can get your hands around the concept, you can create your own takeaways and identify situations when you should do this. One example could be, let's say that you're trying to meet with a prospect, but they keep rescheduling your meetings. Not to say that this is a high volume situation, but use this situation to try to understand the concept here. So let's say that we're trying to meet with an executive and our meeting keeps getting scheduled and rescheduled. Well, that could be a cause for concern. And so you could either just keep rescheduling and hoping that one day, you're able to meet with the prospect, but this could be a scenario where you start to do a takeaway. Not to say you would do this after one cancellation, but let's say they've rescheduled 3 times. You could reach out to the prospect, either an email or, you're talking to someone on the phone, and you might say something like, hey, we can certainly reschedule, no problem at all. Although it seems like you're having trouble finding time for this. Maybe this is not the right time to discuss this. And so you're basically doing a takeaway and you're letting the prospect answer that. And, maybe the prospect says, yeah, you're right, it's not, or they start to tell you, no, it is. Let's do it. Let me give you another example. So the prospect is on the fence. So imagine you sell something and your prospect's sitting there struggling with the decision to move forward, or just really not sure what to do. Yeah, it seems like you're having trouble figuring out what direction to go. Maybe this is not a good fit for you right now. Let me give you another example. Let's say that you're talking to a prospect and you're learning about what they're currently using today, their current state for what you have to sell. And, the prospect seems somewhat interested in what you sell, but whenever you ask them about what they're doing today, things are pretty good. Well, that might cause you to doubt whether or not the prospect really needs what you sell. You're sure you could maybe, get some meetings scheduled or, spend a lot of time with them. But at the end of the day, are they going to spend very precious money on, replacing something that's working okay? I'll give you an example. So let's say you sell a car, and of course, someone might be interested in looking at the latest model, but if the car they have is not very old and it's pretty nice, maybe it's just a couple years old, and sure, you could maybe talk them into test driving or hanging out the dealership. But if things are pretty good, when it's time to agree to a new 6-year, 60-month car loan and put a bunch of money down, are you going to be able to get them to pull the trigger if things are pretty good? Well, it sounds like you guys have done a pretty good job of putting all the right pieces in place. Maybe it does not make sense for us to spend too much time on this right now. So a response in that situation could be, well, it sounds like you guys have done a pretty good job of putting all the right pieces in place, maybe it doesn't make sense for us to spend too much time on this. At that point, you're going to get some sort of response from the prospect. So that might seem like a very risky thing to do. And let's first, before we talk about how a prospect might respond when you do a sales takeaway, let's first talk about when to do the sales takeaway, because there's very clear times when you would want to do that and most times when you would not. So the first time when you would not want to do a sales takeaway, everything is great. So if everything is great, the prospect's responding, the prospect is giving good answers, the prospect is showing interest, you would never want to do a takeaway. If the prospect says, I'd love this, let's move forward, you would never want to express doubt and say, well, I don't know if it's a good fit for you. So clearly, when things are positive, you would never want to do a takeaway. There's other scenarios where things are neutral. The prospect's on the fence, things are stalling out, the prospect's not responding, the prospect's rescheduling. You're basically not getting a very positive, I want to move forward, and you're not getting a very negative. Negative would be, it's not a fit, I'm not interested, we don't need what you sell. So the time when you would want to do this is when it's neutral, because the negative, you don't really need to do a takeaway because the prospect is doing a takeaway for you. If the prospect says, I'm not interested, we don't stop, take me off your list, unsubscribe, there's no reason to do a takeaway because it's already taken away. The only time when you should or could do a takeaway is in the neutral. And this is when prospects they're not expressing clear interest and they're not expressing clear disinterest. So this is where they're on the fence and might make sense to do the takeaway. Now, when you do a takeaway, you're most likely going to get some sort of reaction because it's a very impactful thing to do. So the prospect's going to respond in some sort of way, but there's three different reactions. The first reaction is no reaction, which isn't very likely because if you say, I don't know, maybe it's not a fit, that's the opposite of what most salespeople do. So you're going to get some sort of reaction. What could happen is that the prospect confirms your disqualification. So if you were to say, maybe now's not the right time, you seem pretty busy, the prospect could confirm the disqualification to say, you're right. It's just too hectic right now. And then you actually are pausing or closing the file. And then the third reaction could be the prospect challenges the disqualification. And this is where the prospect says, if you say, well, it seems like you're too busy right now, maybe we should hold off on this to where things lighten up on your side. And the prospect may actually challenge the disqualification to actually say something like, no, actually, we need to get this done before the end of the year. So if this is very important, I'm sorry for the rescheduling. Let's put this on the calendar for next week, and I promise to be there. The great thing about the takeaway is when the prospect challenges the takeaway. And that's really what you're trying to get here. One thing that can happen is that the prospect starts to sell you on why it makes sense to move forward. So most of the time when you're a salesperson, you are selling the prospect on meeting and why they should want you. When you do the takeaway and the prospect challenges the takeaway, the prospect actually starts to sell you on why it makes sense because you're doubting whether or not it makes sense. Now, you may see the second potential reaction there of disqualification and may see that, well, this is risky and I shouldn't do this because the prospect could confirm the takeaway. If I say things seem pretty good, maybe it doesn't make sense, and the prospect says, yeah, you're right, and they go away, that may seem risky for you. But the real benefit here is that if you've done a good job of qualifying, this will actually filter out bad quality prospects, because if the prospect confirms your takeaway, then maybe they're not a good prospect and shouldn't be in your sales funnel. And so if you do this at the right time, you're accomplishing something really good here because you're getting a bad quality prospect out of your funnel. And one thing that when it comes time to close, not only are you getting good prospects to move forward that challenge your disqualification, but you're stripping out and filtering out those bad quality prospects, the prospects that will be difficult to close. Why do the takeaway? The takeaway is extremely powerful. For one thing, it's going to help you to improve rapport. And I already told you that the more rapport you have, easier closing will be. When you do a takeaway, the prospect will see you as a very credible salesperson, because instead of you just always saying you're always in sell mode and always trying to get the prospect to move forward, if you express doubt, you basically will appear that you're looking out for their interest instead of yours. Your interest is closing the prospect, making commission, selling product. The prospect's interest is making a good purchase. And when you say, I don't know if this is a good fit for you, you are demonstrating yourself as being more interested in the prospect's interest than your own interest. And so this can not only improve rapport, it can improve your credibility as being a trusted advisor instead of a product pushing salesperson. I'd already talked about this will improve the quality of leads that are in your pipeline. So if you do takeaways on poor quality leads, those will get out out. So your pipeline will be better leads. This is where you don't end up forecasting a pipeline of deals that don't close and you miss your number and look bad in front of your sales leadership. The takeaway can help with deal momentum. So when you have deals that stall out and you have prospects that aren't replying, kicking the can down the road, going behind the moon. So when you start to take away those prospects, you're going to do two things. One is you're going to have prospects that challenge the disqualification, and those start to move forward, and then you'll disqualify the low quality leads. So deals start to move forward. And one of the most powerful things about the takeaway, when you do a takeaway and the prospect starts to challenge it, most of the time they're going to give you some justification. So if they're explaining to you why you should not take it away, they're going to explain, and that usually involves them giving new information. Like the example that I shared, where the prospect's rescheduling, they say, no, we need to have this done by the end of the year. This is important. Let's meet next week. That's an example of the prospect giving new information. So maybe you did not know that it needed to be done by the end of the year, and the prospect starts to sell you on why it makes sense to move forward. Listen closely, because a lot of times they'll give you additional new information, and you can then use that as your business case and justification for moving forward. And if you add up all of those things, improve rapport, improve credibility, new information, all of those add up to you being able to close your deals better. And so another building block here. So what I just went through there was the firm takeaway, right? You're dealing with a prospect that's not moving forward, on the fence, you take it away. Now, here's a concept called the soft takeaway. So this is taking the concept of the takeaway and softening it a bit. And you can use this when you're cold calling or just starting initial interaction conversations with prospects. And basically, this is not the firm, hey, I don't know if it's a fit. This is just starting to express a little bit of doubt. And so some examples of this is, I don't know if you need what we provide. I don't know if you're a good fit with what we do. I don't know if we can help you in the same way we've helped others. I don't know if you're interested in those improvements. I don't know if you're concerned about those areas. I don't know if you're the right person to speak with. I don't know if it makes sense for us to talk. The time that you'd want to use the soft sales takeaway, a great moment is at the beginning of a cold call. So what the product selling salesperson might do, they get on the phone and it's all about, you're going to love this. You need to hear about this. This is what I sell. And they just power forward. If you, instead of doing that, if you throw in a soft sales takeaway, for example, right after your value proposition. So if you were to say, I help small business owners to do this, but I don't know if we can make that same improvement for you, and that's why I'm reaching out, that creates a push-pull. So you're pushing with, this is how I help, and then you're doing the pull is, but you start to take it away, and that can decrease guardedness on a cold call. We talked about this in the cold calling training module, but you can sprinkle these in your meetings or every time you talk with a prospect. And so it's just a really nice way to reinforce your consultative approach, because when you're talking about improvements you make or talking about a customer example, you then soften that a bit by taking it away. But I don't know if you're interested in those improvements, or I don't know if we can help you in the same way. So there's a building block there of soft takeaway.